House prices across the country rose during March for the first time since early last year, just as the Reserve Bank looks to hit pause on rate rises. Bitcoin ends the March quarter among the best performing asset classes, much better than equities, and the world awaits Donald Trump's arraignment. It's Monday, the 3rd of April, 2023. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Only 4 days this week before we have the Good Friday holiday, but so much going on. A really big week.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, we'll still have a show on Friday, on Good Friday, and on Easter Monday as well, because we never rest.
We love it.
Yours is so much more positive. We love it. Mine is, we're never allowed to have a break. Anyway, Sean, immediately after the show, you've got an interview coming up, and this is really fascinating. Nick Griffin, Munro Partners founding partner and chief investment officer. It's a fascinating topic.
Yes, so we start talking about semiconductor chips and investing in that area because it's kind of known as a new oil, semiconductor chips. And then we go into artificial intelligence and how that works and how you can invest in artificial intelligence. It is among my favourite interviews of the year so far. And I actually tell Nick that because I learnt so much from it. And he puts it all into English, into words that I could understand. And it's such a fascinating area.
I love that is the bar for it to become a fascinating interview. If you can understand it, then hey, anyone else can. I love that.
That's exactly right, though.
It is a really, really good interview. It's coming up a little bit later on. But the main story this morning, Sean, house prices across the country on average rose last month for the first time since April last year, with both Sydney and Melbourne recording significant rises.
Michael, it looks like pressure other than interest rates are starting to play out in the market with lower stock levels, tight rental conditions and overseas immigration putting upward pressure on house prices. We haven't been able to say that for a while. Sydney house prices rose 1.4% last month. That's the second positive month in a row, though prices are still down about 12% on a year earlier, according to CoreLogic. Melbourne prices last month rose 0.6%. That's the first increase since early last year. Prices are still off 9% over the past 12 months or so. Perth and Brisbane prices also rose last month. That means the 4 largest capital cities all recorded house price increases. Now, Perth was up by 0.5%. Brisbane was up by 0.1%. It's not good news everywhere. Prices fell in Hobart, Canberra, Darwin and Adelaide. Hobart led the way down there. Across capital cities, prices rose on average 0.8% during March, and in the regions, prices were up 0.2%.
Sean, I like to make bold statements, but I'm sensing that I need to just hesitate just a little bit, because is there enough evidence to say the housing cycle has turned? Because I really want to say that.
Look, no, probably not actually. In fact, no. But I mean, I suppose the full impact of the 10 rate rises in a row are still to be felt, particularly among people coming off very low fixed rate loans. But there is some cause for optimism. Michael, CoreLogic's Tim Lawless said the number of listings in March was down 20% on average over the past 5 years, so that's helped prices. And at the margin, some renters will take the plunge and buy because rents are so high. Some immigrants will have enough money to be able to purchase a home, so all that supports prices. Also helping alleviate the interest rate pressure has been fierce competition in the home mortgage market. Of course, the Reserve Bank Board meets again tomorrow, and given recent inflation data and the troubles in the banking system in the US and Europe, the board may well decide not to lift rates again. In fact, most of the surveys of economists have it about 50-50. Of course, they may lift rates because they still want to keep downward pressure on price rises. We find all that out tomorrow. But in the meantime, Michael, it is fair to say that the worst of the housing slump is over.
That's not quite as bold a statement as I was hoping to make, but
Sorry.
The worst is over. That's not too bad.
Well, you have to think that Sydney house prices, in certain pockets of Sydney, you would think that they won't fall much further. In fact, the CoreLogic data looks at the most expensive Sydney houses, and some of those have dropped somewhere between 15 and 20%, and you're actually seeing quite a rebound. That's the very top end, the top quartile of housing in Sydney, and you're seeing quite a rebound in that area. So maybe some of those sorts of areas, I mean, we'll have to ask Tim Lawless on this one, maybe we'll be able to say that the slump is over there, but probably not wholesale across all cities, I'm afraid.
So I can't say house prices, they're back, baby, or anything like that.
No, probably not.
Okay, good. Good to know.
In fact, just don't anyway.
What? Hang on, have you just vetoed me using that term ever?
They're back, baby. Yeah.
Okay, noted. All right. How did the local share market end on Friday?
The S&P ASX 200 finished Friday in the quarter high, but not the month. The bourse closed up nearly 1% on Friday to 7,178 points. It was actually down more than 1% for the month, but up 2% for the March quarter. Friday was a big day for the miners, with BHP, Fortescue Metals and Rio Tinto all finishing up between 2 and 4%. Positive sentiment out of China and slightly higher iron ore prices triggered the rise. Wasn't so good for the energy companies, with both Woodside and Santos down more than 1%. Macquarie Group had a good day. The major banks were mostly flat. Wesfarmers and Newcrest Mining were other outperformers, whereas Woolies, Coles and Aristocrat Leisure were underperformers.
All right, and what about international markets?
Well, it's the end of the quarter, so plenty to look at. Now, Wall Street rallied over the weekend, which augurs well for the local market this morning. The S&P 500 finished the session up 1.4%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq was up 1.7%. What's even more impressive, though, is how US indices performed over the 3 months to the end of March. The S&P 500 is up 7% in the first quarter of the year. The Nasdaq 100, which of course is all the tech stocks, is up a whopping 20.5%. Now, that's the biggest quarterly gain since mid-2020. If you look into the detail, the tech stocks are well and truly back. Tesla's up 68%. Meta Platforms, that's the parent of Facebook, it was up 76% during the March quarter. Chip maker NVIDIA rose 90%. Incredible.
So the tech stocks, you could say, they're back, baby.
You could. They're back, baby. European markets over the quarter were up around 8%. Bonds were up around 3%. Much, much better performance all around. But Michael, the asset class that outperformed most others was, drumroll, cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin's up 72% in the first 3 months of this year. That's much better than shares or bonds. As investors became more comfortable with risk, they started buying into cryptos again, and Bitcoin was really the one that benefited. It's now worth around $28,500 a unit. Very interesting quarter. Otherwise, Michael, oil prices were up again over the weekend, with Brent crude just below $80 a barrel, gold's around $1,960 an ounce, and the Aussie dollar is trading at just under 67 US cents.
And of course, I feel like I should remind people that even though I've declared tech stocks to be back, you should certainly seek professional advice before making any investment decisions, and definitely do not take my word for it.
Well, certainly don't take the word of anyone that says tech stocks are back, baby. That is a sure giveaway.
That's a very good point, Sean. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, opposition leader Peter Dutton yesterday said the Liberal Party has no plans to overhaul its policy agenda or buy into trendy issues, despite its historic by-election defeat in the seat of Aston in suburban Melbourne.
Yes, maybe not the message that many of the faithful wanted to hear, really. Dutton and his shrinking team will be under enormous pressure to rethink a bunch of critical issues, things like climate change, the voice referendum. The opposition leader himself is now under pressure, though I'm not quite sure whether anyone's putting up their hand to take the job. Yesterday, Dutton took responsibility for the Aston by-election defeat. Now, that's the first time in more than 100 years that the government has won a by-election seat held by the opposition. Dutton said some of the Liberal Party attributes were frankly timeless and worth re-prosecuting, trying to take some of the credit, and probably deservedly so to some extent, for some of the changes that have occurred over the past 12 months. But he also ceded ground on some things, kind of. For example, on accepting the most recent United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The other point to note from the by-election is that in the House of Reps, the government now has 78 seats in the 151-seat House. It just gives it a little bit more room for comfort.
That is an amazing stat, though, isn't it? That it is the first time in more than a century that the government has won a by-election seat held by the opposition. That's remarkable.
It is a disaster. Aston is a disaster for the Libs. There's no doubt about that. Not necessarily the coalition, but definitely for the Libs. And you would imagine that it will force Dutton and the leadership team to actually rethink how they're prosecuting arguments. I thought that the business community last week coming out and saying, hey, all this climate change stuff, right? Libs, you need to be part of the conversation, because at the moment the Greens are dictating because they hold the balance of power, and just calling on the coalition or the Conservative parties to be part of the conversation again. They really do need to go back to the drawing board, I'm afraid.
Yeah, it's going to be a very, very tough time for the party. Now, Sean, AMP shareholders have voted down the company's executive remuneration plan, still angry over the wealth manager's financial performance 5 years after the Hayne Royal Commission.
Keeps giving, I'm afraid, for AMP. Now, at the company's annual general meeting on Friday, just shy of 50% of shareholders voted against the company's proposed 2022 remuneration report. That's well above the 25% threshold required to hand down an official strike. A vote against the report at next year's AGM will provide a trigger for shareholders to spill the board of directors. The company's lost about 75% of its market value since the Royal Commission 5 years ago. Incredible.
Porter Davis Homes, the country's 12th largest home builder, has gone into liquidation after failing to secure a buyer or capital investor.
Yes, it leaves more than 1,700 projects unfinished across Victoria and Queensland. Grant Thornton Australia were appointed liquidators of 14 companies in the Melbourne-based group on Friday. Porter Davis purchased boutique luxury builder Engelhard back in 2021, but that hasn't really worked. It hasn't been able to weather deteriorating market conditions. Clearly, the sector has been hit by surging costs and fixed price contracts, which is where Porter Davis Homes has come a cropper.
God, don't you feel for those people with those 1,700 unfinished projects?
Absolutely. And it's just normal, everyday people who have got a builder to come in and build their dream home or renovate or whatever, and they're just in the lurch now.
Yeah, awful. Now, Sean, F45, the Australian fitness franchise that's now based in the United States, has secured a $90 million debt facility to help the company reorganize its finances and halt the widespread closure of struggling gyms. And longtime investor and actor Mark Wahlberg has also been elevated to a head of brand role.
Very close to my heart, this one.
Yes, I was going to ask you just kind of how much insight you have into the F45 operations, considering you're there most kind of days, really, aren't you?
Once we finish recording, I'd like to say I'm there most days. It's probably not quite true, but I'm happy to go with that. I certainly know that they inflict pain on middle-aged men like myself. Did you know F45 gyms don't have mirrors? Or at least the one I'm in doesn't have a mirror. You go to a gym and everyone's looking at themselves. The last thing I want to do is look at myself when I go to a gym. F45 gyms don't have mirrors.
Oh, maybe it is just yours. Maybe when you signed up, they took them out. Sorry.
Anyway, Michael, the last 12 months or so has been a pretty tough one for the very ambitious gym company F45. About $1.2 billion in value has been wiped from the company's market cap. It's listed on the NASDAQ and its shares are down about 68% this financial year. The sudden resignation of Australian co-founder and chief executive officer Adam Gilchrist last July and a series of sharp earnings downgrades pushed the company's shares much, much lower. Of course, F45 sells franchised gyms that broadcast 45-minute circuit training workouts through a centralised program. Apart from just the slowing gym growth, F45 is also battling several lawsuits. One stems from footballer David Beckham, who alleges he's owed nearly $19 million from a series of broken contracts and missed opportunities he was promised as part of his influencer and marketing contracts. Greg Norman, the golfer or former golfer, who was present alongside Wahlberg and Gilchrist at the ringing of the stock exchange bell back in 2021, is also suing for $1.5 million in promotional payments he's alleged he's owed. Anyway, obviously a gym chain in all sorts of trouble.
Yeah, sounds like it. International news now, Sean, and it is a very, very big week in US politics, with former President Donald Trump expected to be arraigned on Tuesday, US time.
Parts of Lower Manhattan will be closed as Trump appears. Now, late last week, he was indicted by a Manhattan grand jury after a probe into hush money paid to porn star Stormy Daniels. He's the first former US president to face criminal charges. Of course, he's running for the Republican nomination for next year's presidential race. He's denied any wrongdoing and called the probe and the indictment a partisan attack. Trump already warned there could be violence if he was indicted, saying on his Truth Social platform on March 24 that if he was charged, there could be potential death and destruction. Ahead of the indictment, he also called for protesters to take our nation back, which of course echoes his rhetoric before the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. Let's hope nothing like that happens. He has been quiet the last few days, and it's Tuesday US time, which will be Wednesday morning Australian time, that all happens.
Yeah, we say it's a big week in US politics. Let's just hope it's a peaceful week.
Yeah, exactly right.
Now, this is an interesting one, Sean. A new report says that Japan faces a shortage of 11 million workers by 2040 because of its rapidly aging population.
Yeah, so the working age population in the country of 126 million is expected to drop by 12% from 2027 to 2040, according to the study by independent think tank Recruit Works Institute. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has campaigned on a platform of reversing the declining birth rate and warned of societal collapse as the number of births hits a new low. Japan has the largest percentage of older adults, with around 28% aged over 65 years. That's way in front of the next, which is Italy at 23%. Then Finland, Portugal and Greece, they're all around 22%, according to the Population Reference Bureau. For the record, Australia doesn't actually make the top 50 of that list. It is an economic crisis, though, because if you don't have enough workers, you literally can't run the nation.
I'm quite intrigued, Sean, about the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida campaigning on a platform of reversing the declining birth rate. It feels like there is the potential for some very erotic advertising campaigns.
I didn't think you were going there. I thought you were going to start talking about Handmaid's Tale or a societal crisis that we're heading towards. But no, you turned into eroticism.
Yep. Sorry to disappoint there, Sean.
Disappoint, but not surprise.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Now, Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview, and your guest today is Nick Griffin, Munro Partners founding partner, chief investment officer. You start with semiconductors, but it is a pretty wide-ranging chat.
Yes, mostly really. It's probably about artificial intelligence, how it works, how to invest in it, whether it's a good thing to invest in. Really, really fascinating conversation.
Yeah, it is a great one for investors. And of course, we've also got Fear and Greed the week ahead with our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas. Always very excited, especially in a week like this.
Yes, and I mean, this week we talked to Stephen from the Melbourne Flower Show where he was promoting his side hustle. Funny what economists do on the side, Michael, really?
It is quite an unusual side hustle.
It is definitely not what I expected Stephen Koukoulas to do with his spare time.
It is well worth a listen just to find out more about that side hustle. That's coming up in the Fear and Greed playlist as well on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And Sean, we've got to kick off the week with Mia, a most enthusiastic advocate, which is basically someone who is spreading the word about fear and greed. Terrible acronym, but it is the best we could come up with. This came in from Jess via Instagram. She said, I would love to dob in an upcoming Mia. My partner, Lachlan, was the one who got me onto listening to you guys every morning. He raves about your podcast to his friends, and he recently listened to your audiobook, Michael, called How to Be Remembered, and he's been telling me how much he enjoyed that. We both also listened to How Do They Afford That and have been enjoying the conversations about money that it has prompted. We love the podcasts. So I reckon it's actually kind of a joint Mia today, both Jess and Lachlan.
Thank you to both of you, Jess and Lachlan. Fantastic.
How good is that?
Yeah, love it. Keep them coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 3rd of April, 2023. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And of course, stay up to date on all the business news with Alexa and your Amazon Echo smart speaker. Simply say, Alexa, play the Fear and Greed podcast to catch the latest episode. And you can grab yours now at amazon.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.